Talk about Jim Brown, who I think, just candidly talking about it, is going to be remembered as a very complex figure in a lot of regards because he had some off-field troubles that are always going to be out there that you have to question and wonder about. But he was, in addition to being one of the best football players who ever lived, if not maybe kind of the Babe Ruth of the NFL skill-wise. He also was someone who fought against racial injustice for his entire life and should be remembered for kind of everything. But Smokey, you grew up in the era where Jim Brown was not playing. I would think he was pretty much done, right, by the time that you can really remember it, because he didn't really play that long, but he was an immense celebrity and social figure throughout your youth and formative years.
Yeah, I would think that I remember probably, like most people don't remember John Madden as the football coach of the Oakland Raiders Super Bowl champion coach. They remember him as the broadcaster and then, of course, his video game. I got a glimpse of Jim Brown when I was very young. I remember about 64, 65 is really the time that I started watching some football. And his career ended in 65. So for me to say I remember that game against the New York Giants or whoever, no, I don't. I just know all the highlights. I remember when I used to read books when I was a kid, when I'd get these books about the greatest this and that. He walked away from the game 8 out of 9 years, led the league in rushing, walked away from the game, very similar during still what was his prime, even though he's a running back, as Barry Sanders. And who knows what he would have put up. He was for a long time the all-time leading rusher in NFL history. Of course, that record has been shattered by many, and including Emmitt Smith. But I had a chance to interview him at the Super Bowl in Detroit, and I remember also having a chance to see and visit with him off to the side at a Super Bowl when we were in Miami. This is back when I was in radio in Tyler, but when my runner at the time told me, hey, we're going to get Jim Brown. And I would say, I knew I had a chance to get Joe Gibbs just because of what he meant to me as a fan of the Washington then Redskins in the 3 Super Bowls. There aren't many that get me jittery, like I'm looking over the side of a 20-story building or off a bridge. Jim Brown made me nervous, not because of, and again, he did have a very unfortunate, a lot of different stories about violence and assault and much more. It wasn't because of that. It was because Jim Brown had a presence. There's some athletes that have a presence. There's certain that are great, but then he had this aura about him, and I felt it. And I'll tell you this, once he sat down, he was as incredible an interview as I could ever remember. Very insightful. I asked him about the black-white issues, and his concern was that not enough athletes are doing enough to talk about it. But he also was very, very aware that sometimes that there's a lot of issues that really aren't, that maybe people overreact. This was back many years ago. And then the other part of it was I asked him about his off-field problem. Just like yesterday, we had to ask Roger Clemens about the Hall of Fame. His, of course, were violent stuff, allegations, and in some cases, the truth. And he handled it, and he mentioned it, and he was very impressive. I'll just say that. And I walked into it when he came over to the table. I was nervous, and it's probably 1 to 3 guys that I've ever been nervous before I interviewed in my 42 years in the radio or television business.
Would it be fair to say, the way I remember, and obviously I'm a different generation, but for most of my life growing up, Tom Brady, Joe Montana was, I guess, kind of considered the greatest football player ever, and mostly because he was, more recent and also had 4 Super Bowls, which, I guess, at the time was a record, and now we've seen what Brady's done, obviously. But was Jim Brown kind of the de facto greatest football player alive, you think, up until maybe a Montana or a Brady came along in the 80s at the earliest?
Yeah, I think so. Now think about this. He won the NFL championship the next year before he retired. He won 3 MVPs early on and then won his last year and walked away. Remember, he was also an incredible, I'm not saying he was like Oscar Award winning, but he was also a presence when it came to Hollywood, when it came to movies. And so, yes, Craig, he was the Babe Ruth of football as I was growing up. There's the argument about who's the greatest running back of all time. He ran like Earl Campbell with physicality, but also had the speed that you wouldn't catch him. Earl had some of that early until his body started to, kind of betray him. You hear about the Jim Brown lacrosse as being an incredible lacrosse player, but all the things that he did, what made him so amazing was his football. He got into acting. Yes, some of the off the field struggles as well, and because of what he was trying to do with race relations. He was not overbearing about it. And probably a lot more people listened to him because he wasn't trying to just jam it down some athletes or others' throats. He just kind of handled it in what I thought was a very, very classy way. Yeah, he was it. He was the guy. And I'm not so sure with me being who I am as far as when I grew up and my age, I think about Montana as the greatest quarterback, and that's arguable because now what Brady's done. Sure. But as far as a football player, I would think Jim Brown has to be in the conversation, and that conversation might have one or two names.
Yeah, I'm on his IMDb page right now.
And look, Hollywood career might be as impressive as his football career, honestly.
A lot of times we think about the football player, and he was so much more than that, but that's what kickstarted how people got to know him.
And I don't know if it was his personal best role. The best movie he was probably ever in was The Dirty Dozen, which is fantastic. Classic movie that he was in. But he became so much more. And I do think that now that he's passed, there's a generation that won't know, that this is a guy who only played 8 years in the NFL and then left because he just felt he wanted to do more. There was more to that, and was very, very socially active when it came to fighting against racial injustice. And when I think of the people of that time, the famous, that were not Martin Luther King, that was what he was doing. I think of Muhammad Ali, and I think of Jim Brown on that same level. Do we lose Smokey?
Appears so.
Yeah, but I do, and he'll get it back. But yeah, I think it's Ali and maybe even Kareem a little bit,
and then LeBron.
Yeah, but
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but okay. No, Smokey, I was saying that when I think of people who were famous for something else that were also fighting in that time in the late 60s and 70s for civil rights, I think of Muhammad Ali, I think of Jim Brown on that level, maybe even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar a little bit, to that level of these are guys who were so much more than just the athlete.
No question. Yeah, and Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, there was always, and there has been criticism of, was Tiger Woods vocal enough? Was Michael Jordan vocal enough? And were they protecting their business interests rather than, or their image rather than maybe going against the grain? That doesn't mean they were wrong. It's just they weren't as outspoken. That doesn't mean that they weren't doing work behind the scenes. But yeah, Jim Brown, he played 9 years. 8 of 9 years ran for 1,000 yards. I want you to think about this. They're now playing 17 games a year, right? Jim Brown broke the single-season rushing record of just under, I think it was just over 1,500 yards, and I'm not looking that up. I've always known that, in 12 games. They played 12 games. So all of what he put together, all of that, the stats and everything else, was in 12 games. And, he was it. And when I saw that flash up on my phone today, a lot of times I'll see kind of a flash and miss it. I grabbed the story. I said, oh, no. And I know he's in his 80s, and I know he had been struggling of late. He was a powerful figure, a powerful man, and he was someone that when I look back at my favorite interviews, I always love the Joe Frazier interview or whatever, but getting Jim Brown was awfully special.
Smokey, thank you so much for hopping on your day off. Certainly appreciate it. Thanks for running down the guests today.
No problem. You guys wrap it up. Hit the finish line. Let's go. Thank you. All right.
There's Smokey. We're back all